Our next speaker is Charlotte Bailey from Archaeology, speaking on Clinton Pioneer Cemetery mortuary data collection and analysis.
Is this on? Oh, let's give it a shot. It is on. All right. Hi, everyone. So in the spring of 2017, Katrina Bauer and I drove to the Clinton Pioneer Cemetery in Clinton, BC to conduct basic mortuary analysis survey on the grave markers that were there. We were doing this for an Archaeology of Death project. While we were there, we collected information from 60 grave markers based on sex, age, grave marker material, and just distribution through time. For quantitative analysis, I revisited this data and added an additional 123 individuals to the data set. I also added cemetery section. With the additional 123 individuals and data, I was able to run non-parametric tests to see whether or not the differences that I was seeing were actually statistically significant. What I'm going to cover today is basically a very, very quick summary of the village and the cemetery, the initial data collection and what I found, and the revisited data collection. Before I go too into that, I'd like to say that I wouldn't have the data possible were it not for the Village of Clinton and Daniela Dyke and Tom Dow. They were exceptionally helpful. So Clinton is a place that most of you have probably driven through and never even noticed. It's very small. It's in the central interior. It used to be known as Mile 47 on the Caribou Gold Rush Trail. The cemetery was donated to the Clinton pioneer families in 1911 by the original owner of the Clinton Hotel. However, the earliest grave there is from 1860. Currently, there are over 250 graves in the cemetery in various states of degradation. It's also on that little mound there, which was the only place that was still covered in knee-deep snow. So future reference, do not survey in knee-deep snow. It is not efficient. There's the entrance there. As you can see, you can't see the stairs. So the initial data collection looked at name, sex, year of birth and death, age at death, grave marker type, and material, and individuals who died between 1870 and 1960. We were dividing the cemetery into pre-1920 and post-1920 sections, and only looking at adulting individuals age 19 and up. That's one of the grave markers. What we found was we had basically an equal distribution of males and females, but we also looked at the average age of death and the grave marker type and material distribution. When we looked at the average age of death, it was once again the same. It was 61 for both males and females. However, when we looked at it divided pre and post 1920, we saw something interesting. For pre-1920 males, they died at an average age of 63. Post-1920, it was an average age of 59. Not that big of a difference, but females went up from 50 to 68, which is a pretty big jump. Here's a couple more of the grave markers. As you can see, we had the original wooden one and then more complex. When I revisited the data for my quantitative analysis project, I used data provided by the Village of Clinton that had cemetery section, names, information about the individual, all sorts of stuff. The new sample also included infants to elderly, with the oldest person in the sample being 93, and the youngest people being neonates. Using this data, I was able to run non-parametric tests to determine the significance of the data that I was seeing. I also divided the individuals into 4 categories, whether they died in the early, middle, late, and modern period, with the date ranges up there. Using the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, I compared sex and age ordinal, sex and period of death, age ordinal, and time period. This allowed me to search for significant differences between those variables. Not one of my KS tests showed significant results, which is kind of disappointing at first. But what I did find was that most of them came pretty close, like the one at the top there. My DMAX observed a 0.211, didn't exceed the necessary one for 0.233. But if I looked at the 90% confidence level, it's possible that I would have seen stronger things. I also ran chi-square. I had grave marker material data for 74 of the 183. Most of that was provided from the paperwork or this actual visit, but because half the graves were covered in snow, I couldn't see them. My chi-squares, I actually started to see positive or significant results. I also looked at the cemetery section, which was the most interesting section that I looked at. The Clinton Pioneer Cemetery is distributed in sections A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Not a single one of my individuals were from section B. What I did find, however, was that in the early to middle period, only sections E, G, and H were in use. The rest of the cemetery was not in use until the late to modern period. However, the most used areas are section G and H, which have been used forever, and section D, which has only been used recently. I also found that some families weren't all in the same section. You'd have someone who was in section A, and the rest of the family would be in section G. And it would flat out say, like, this is Mary, she's his wife. But she doesn't get to be buried near him. Basically, with this cemetery, what I've learned is a lot about this very small village, but it's just something that I've enjoyed learning about and would like to revisit in the future. Thanks.